The crack of an ancient Remington 700 echoed across the sprawling Ironhawk Precision Training Center as 200 elite marksmen, military contractors, and shooting professionals fell into stunned silence. What they'd just witnessed defied every principle of modern ballistics and equipment superiority. A 22-year-old woman named Elena had just hit a target at 1,200 yards using a rifle that belonged in a museum, achieving what their state-of-the-art precision weapons couldn't accomplish. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Director Kane Murdoch's face had transformed from smug condescension to ashen disbelief in the span of 3 heartbeats. The target, a steel plate barely visible to the naked eye, positioned at a distance that challenged even the facility's most advanced computerized systems, now bore the unmistakable impact. Crater of Elena's single shot. Nobody makes his $1 million training center look obsolete with antique equipment on his watch, especially not some girl carrying her great-grandfather's World War II relic. But just 30 minutes earlier, that same director had been laughing openly, pointing at Elena's battered rifle case and asking security if someone had mistakenly let a Civil War reenactor onto the premises. The crowd of professionals had erupted in laughter when she'd unpacked what appeared to be a museum piece, a weathered 1943 Remington 700 with iron sights, no modern scope, no computerized assistance, an laser rangefinder, just wood, steel, and decades of careful maintenance. Little did they know that Elena had been making impossible shots with that antique since she was 12 years old, guided by the ghost-like whispers of a legendary sniper whose techniques had been forgotten by modern military doctrine. What Director Murdoch saw as obsolete equipment, Elena knew as a precision instrument that had claimed enemy targets across 3 different wars, passed down through generations of the Voss family like a sacred relic. The Ironhawk Precision Training Center stood as the pinnacle of America's civilian and military marksmanship excellence. Nestled in the remote Colorado highlands, its advanced facilities hosted only the most elite shooters from special operations units, law enforcement agencies, and private military contractors. The center's reputation was legendary throughout shooting circles. If you earned certification at Ironhawk, you were among the absolute best marksmen in the world. On this particular crisp October morning, the center buzzed with unprecedented activity. The annual Extreme Range Challenge had drawn together the finest precision shooters from across the globe, each armed with the latest in high-tech weaponry. Custom-built rifles worth more than luxury cars, computerized scopes that could calculate wind drift and bullet drop automatically, and ammunition manufactured to tolerances measured in thousandths of inches. The atmosphere crackled with professional competition, corporate sponsorship deals, and unspoken hierarchies based on confirmed long-range kills and competition victories. Among this sea of tactical gear and modern equipment walked Elena Voss, her slight frame dwarfed by the towering figures of battle-hardened veterans and competitive shooters. She carried a simple canvas rifle case that looked like it had survived multiple military campaigns, which it had. Her dark green eyes missed nothing as she studied the various shooting stations, the respectful way competitors nodded to sponsored professionals, and the dismissive glances directed toward anyone carrying equipment that didn't gleam with modern technology. The whispered conversations around her ranged from speculation about new ammunition technologies to debates over which manufacturer produced the most accurate long-range platforms. Elena listened quietly, recognizing the names of rifles, scopes, and techniques that had dominated the precision shooting world for the past decade. She understood their language, their obsession with mechanical advantage, their belief that superior equipment automatically translated to superior performance. What they didn't understand, what they couldn't possibly comprehend, was that the weathered rifle in her case had been achieving impossible shots long before they're computerized. Marvels had even been imagined. Her great-grandfather, Staff Sergeant Jakob Voss, had carried this same rifle through the Pacific Theater, where it had earned a reputation among Japanese forces as the ghost gun, strikes that came from distances they thought impossible, from a shooter they could never locate. Stay close to the novice areas, her younger brother had advised before she'd made this 6-hour drive to Ironhawk. These people take their equipment seriously, and they don't like outsiders showing up with old gear. Elena had nodded politely but knew she wouldn't be staying in any novice section. She'd come here for one specific reason: to prove that the old ways, the forgotten techniques, the seemingly obsolete methods could still outperform everything modern technology had to offer. The registration process had been its own form of humiliation. When Elena had listed her rifle specifications on the equipment form, the young clerk had looked up with barely concealed amusement. "Ma'am, I think there might be some confusion. This is an extreme long-range competition. The minimum recommended equipment standards." "I understand the requirements," Elena had interrupted gently. "My rifle meets all safety specifications and legal requirements. That's all that matters." The clerk had shrugged and processed her registration, probably assuming she'd withdraw once she realized the impossibility of competing against military-grade precision weapons with what appeared to be a vintage hunting rifle. He'd handed her the competitor badge with the kind of polite smile usually reserved for well-meaning amateurs who were about to learn expensive lessons about the realities of professional marksmanship. As Elena approached the main demonstration area where Director Murdoch was preparing his opening presentation, she could feel the collective assessment of 200 professional shooters. Their eyes cataloged her equipment with the quick efficiency of experts, noting the absence of a spotting scope, the lack of a shooting rest system, the complete absence of any electronic assistance devices. In their world, she was bringing a horse and buggy to a Formula One race. What none of them could see, what the battered exterior of her rifle case concealed, was a weapon that had been maintained and modified with obsessive precision across 4 generations. The trigger had been hand-tuned to break at exactly 2 pounds of pressure. The barrel had been recrowned twice by master gunsmiths who understood the delicate relationship between steel and accuracy. Every component had been tested, adjusted, and perfected through thousands of hours of range time and real-world application. More importantly, what they couldn't perceive was the knowledge that came with that rifle, techniques passed down through whispered instruction from father to daughter, grandfather to granddaughter. Methods of reading wind that didn't require electronic instruments, ways of calculating distance that predated laser rangefinders, breathing patterns that steadied the body beyond what modern equipment could compensate for. Elena Voss was about to teach Ironhawk Precision Training Center that in the world of extreme marksmanship, the shooter mattered far more than the weapon. And that sometimes, the old ways weren't just equal to modern methods, they were superior to them in ways that couldn't be measured by computer algorithms or explained by ballistic software. The impossible shot that had just silenced 200 experts was only the beginning of what would become the most talked-about demonstration in precision shooting history. Elena's antique rifle was about to rewrite everything they thought they knew about long-range marksmanship, one impossible target at a time. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Director Kane Murdoch stood frozen behind his high-powered spotting scope, his weathered hands trembling slightly as he adjusted the focus again and again, desperately hoping his eyes were deceiving him. The steel target at 1,200 yards, a distance that challenged even his facility's most advanced precision rifles, bore an unmistakable impact crater dead center. A perfect hit from a rifle that shouldn't have been capable of accuracy beyond 400 yards, fired by a young woman who had no business being at his elite training center. "Impossible," he whispered, the word escaping his lips like a prayer to a god he'd stopped believing in. "This is absolutely impossible." Around him, the carefully orchestrated demonstration had devolved into chaos. 200 of the world's finest marksmen pressed forward, straining to see through their own spotting scopes and binoculars. The electronic target system, a $1 million installation that measured impact locations to within millimeters, displayed readings that made seasoned professionals question their own understanding of ballistics. Master Instructor Riley Thornton, a former Marine Scout sniper with 3 combat tours and 17 confirmed long-range kills, lowered his scope with the slow, deliberate movements of a man whose worldview had just been shattered. "Director," he said, his voice carefully controlled but carrying an undercurrent of disbelief that 20 years of military training couldn't quite suppress. "That target registration, it's showing a sub-MOA impact at 1,200 yards. From iron sights." The crowd behind them erupted into a mixture of arguments and accusations. Professional shooters who had spent fortunes on custom equipment began questioning whether they'd witnessed some elaborate trick, while others demanded to examine Elena's rifle for hidden modifications. The carefully maintained atmosphere of professional competition had evaporated, replaced by something far more primal, the desperate need to understand how their most fundamental assumptions about marksmanship had just been proven wrong. "There has to be an explanation," muttered Jackson Cross, a competitive shooter sponsored by 3 major firearms manufacturers. His custom rifle, equipped with a $8,000 computerized scope and hand-loaded ammunition that cost $15 per round, suddenly felt inadequate in his hands. Nobody shoots sub-MOA at that distance with World War II equipment. It's physically impossible. Director Murdoch's mind raced through possible explanations, each more unlikely than the last. He'd spent 30 years in this business, first as a military sniper, then as a civilian contractor, and finally as the owner of the most prestigious marksmanship training facility in North America. He'd seen every trick, every modification, every attempt to gain an unfair advantage. But this defied everything he understood about the relationship between equipment and performance. The financial implications alone made his stomach churn. Ironhawk Precision Training Center charged clients $5,000 per week for advanced training courses, justified by their possession of the most cutting-edge equipment available. Their reputation was built on the promise that superior technology, combined with expert instruction, could transform good shooters into great ones. Elena Vos had just demonstrated that a rifle older than most of his instructors could outperform everything in his armory. "Sir," called out Lieutenant Colonel Patricia Hayes, a Special Operations Command liaison who had attended the demonstration to evaluate new equipment for her unit. "My team needs to understand what just happened here. We're about to approve a $2 million contract for precision rifles based on the performance standards we've seen today. If there's equipment out there that can exceed those standards... She didn't need to finish the sentence. Everyone present understood the implications. If a 70-year-old rifle could outshoot modern precision weapons, then everything they believed about technological advancement in firearms had been fundamentally wrong. It wasn't just embarrassing, it was career-threatening for everyone whose professional reputation was built on expertise with modern equipment. Murdoch found himself studying Elena with new eyes, searching for any detail that might explain what he'd witnessed. She stood calmly beside her shooting position, making no effort to celebrate or draw attention to her achievement. Her demeanor was that of someone who had accomplished exactly what she'd expected to accomplish. Competent, professional, and utterly unsurprised by her success. The rifle itself lay across the shooting bench, and Murdoch could now see details that his earlier dismissive glance had missed. While the weapon was undeniably old, it showed signs of meticulous care and maintenance. The wood stock bore the patina of decades of careful handling, but every metal surface gleamed with the kind of attention that spoke to deep expertise. This wasn't a museum piece pressed into service. This was a working tool maintained by someone who understood its capabilities intimately. "Check the wind readings," Murdoch ordered, grasping for any technical explanation that might preserve his understanding of how precision shooting worked. "Verify the distance measurement. Run a full diagnostic on the target system." His staff scrambled to comply, but Murdoch already knew what they would find. The Iron Hawk facility prided itself on precise measurements and controlled conditions. The wind meters showed variable crosswinds gusting up to 12 miles per hour, conditions that would challenge any shooter. The laser rangefinder confirmed the distance at exactly 1,247 yards, well beyond what any reasonable person would attempt with iron sights. The target system had been calibrated that morning and was functioning perfectly. Elena's shot hadn't been a fluke aided by perfect conditions. She had succeeded despite challenging circumstances that would have tested even the most advanced equipment in his facility. "Ma'am," Murdoch found himself saying, his voice carrying a respect that hadn't been there 30 minutes earlier. "I need to ask you some questions." Elena turned to face him, her expression patient but alert. "Of course, Director." "That rifle," he began, then stopped, unsure how to phrase his question without sounding like he was questioning fundamental laws of physics. "How long have you been shooting?" "Since I was 12, sir," she replied simply. "This particular rifle has been in my family for 3 generations." The crowd pressed closer, sensing that they were about to learn something important. Professional curiosity had overcome embarrassment, and even the most skeptical observers wanted to understand how their assumptions had been so thoroughly challenged. Murdoch realized that he was facing a moment that would define his facility's reputation for years to come. He could either acknowledge what had happened and learn from it, or he could find reasons to dismiss it and maintain his comfortable certainties about equipment and performance. The choice would determine not just his personal credibility, but the future direction of precision shooting training at the highest levels. The impossible shot had been fired. The target had been hit. 200 witnesses had seen it happen. Now Director Kane. Murdoch had to decide whether he was willing to have his entire understanding of marksmanship fundamentally challenged by a 22-year-old woman carrying her great-grandfather's rifle. But 90 minutes earlier, that same Director Murdoch had been standing at the registration desk, his voice dripping with condescension as he addressed the growing crowd of onlookers. "Ladies and gentlemen, it appears we have someone who thinks this is a Civil War reenactment rather than a precision shooting competition," he had announced, gesturing dramatically toward Elena as she carefully unpacked her rifle case. The laughter that erupted from the assembled professionals was immediate and brutal. Elena had felt every eye in the facility turn toward her as she methodically laid out her equipment, or rather, the conspicuous absence of what these people considered essential equipment. No computerized scope, no electronic wind meter, no custom shooting rest, no laser rangefinder. Just the weathered rifle, a simple leather sling, and a small canvas bag containing hand-loaded ammunition that looked like it had been crafted in someone's garage, rather than a precision manufacturing facility. "Is that thing even safe to fire?" called out Victor Steele, a former Delta Force operator turned civilian contractor who carried more high-tech gear on his person than most small military units possessed. His custom rifle system, worth more than Elena's car, gleamed with the kind of tactical accessories that appeared in advanced warfare magazines. "I mean, shouldn't antiques like that be in a museum rather than on a firing line?" The crowd's amusement had reached a crescendo when Elena began her pre-shooting routine. While other competitors were programming their computerized scopes and consulting weather stations that provided real-time atmospheric data, Elena simply stood behind her rifle and closed her eyes. For nearly 30 seconds, she remained perfectly still, her breathing slow and deliberate, as if she were listening to something the others couldn't hear. "Oh, this is rich," Murdoch had muttered to his assistant, loud enough for several bystanders to hear. "She's probably praying to the rifle gods or channeling the spirit of Annie Oakley." The comment had triggered another wave of laughter from spectators who had paid substantial fees to witness demonstrations of cutting-edge marksmanship. Technology. What none of them could have understood was that Elena wasn't praying or performing some mystical ritual. She was following a procedure taught to her by her great-grandfather, passed down through generations of Vos family marksmen who had learned to read environmental conditions, using senses that no electronic device could replicate. She was feeling the subtle pressure changes that indicated wind patterns at different altitudes, listening for the almost imperceptible sounds that revealed air density variations, and allowing her body to attune itself to the rhythm of the mountain environment surrounding Ironhawk. The mockery had intensified when Elena requested permission to examine the target area through a standard pair of binoculars, rather than the high-powered spotting scopes available at each shooting position. "Sweetheart," Director Murdoch had said, his tone taking on the patronizing quality usually reserved for children who didn't understand adult concepts. "These targets are positioned at distances where the naked eye can't even see them clearly. You're going to need serious optical assistance if you want to have any chance of—" "I understand the distances, sir," Elena had interrupted politely but firmly. "I just prefer to see the target environment as my rifle will see it." The statement had confused many of the onlookers. Modern precision shooting relied heavily on technological amplification, massive scopes that magnified targets to 20 or 30 times their actual size, electronic systems that calculated bullet drop and wind compensation automatically. The idea that someone would voluntarily limit their visual information seemed not just foolish, but actively counterproductive. Master Instructor Thornton, despite his later shock at Elena's performance, had been among the most vocal skeptics during the initial setup. "Ma'am, I've been teaching precision marksmanship for 15 years, and I can tell you with absolute certainty that what you're attempting is impossible. These targets require mathematical precision that can only be achieved with proper equipment. You're setting yourself up for public embarrassment." Elena had simply nodded and continued her preparations, seemingly unaffected by the professional consensus that she was about to humiliate herself in front of 200 of the world's most accomplished marksmen. She loaded a single round into her rifle's chamber with movements so smooth and practiced that they appeared choreographed, then settled into a shooting position that looked deceptively simple compared to the complex body mechanics being employed by other competitors. The betting had started almost immediately. Corporate sponsors began wagering on how badly Elena would miss her first target, with odds heavily favoring a complete failure to even hit the target backing at 600 yards, let alone the extreme distance targets that formed the competition's main challenges. Some spectators openly questioned whether her ammunition would even reach the 1,200-yard line, given the apparent age and limitations of her equipment. "I'm calling it now," proclaimed Dr. Harrison Webb, a ballistics expert who consulted for several major ammunition manufacturers. "That rifle probably hasn't been zeroed in decades. She'd be lucky to hit within 10 feet of any target beyond 400 yards. This is what happens when sentiment overrides science." The scientific consensus among the gathered experts was overwhelming and unanimous. Elena's approach violated every principle of modern precision shooting. Her equipment was inadequate, her methods were outdated, and her confidence was clearly the result of inexperience rather than genuine capability. The demonstration was being recorded by multiple camera crews, and many observers were already anticipating the viral video that would result from such a spectacular failure. Even Elena's fellow competitors, despite the traditional courtesy extended to all participants, couldn't hide their skepticism. Sarah Chun, a 3-time national champion whose rifle featured every technological advantage money could buy, had approached Elena with what appeared to be genuine concern. "Listen," Chun had said quietly, "I don't know who told you this was a good idea, but you might want to consider withdrawing before the actual competition begins. The media attention from failing this badly could follow you for years. These aren't casual shooting distances. We're talking about shots that challenge. Olympic-level marksmen with the best equipment available." Elena had thanked her for the advice but declined to withdraw, explaining that she had driven 6 hours specifically to test her capabilities against the best shooters in the country. The explanation had only reinforced the general perception that Elena was either delusional about her abilities or completely unaware of what she was attempting. The preparation period had concluded with Director Murdoch making an announcement that would later prove to be one of the most ironic statements in competitive shooting history. "Ladies and gentlemen, we pride ourselves at Ironhawk on maintaining the highest standards of precision marksmanship. Today's demonstration will clearly illustrate the importance of proper equipment, professional training, and respect for the technical demands of extreme range shooting. Some lessons are best learned through direct experience." The crowd had applauded enthusiastically, fully expecting to witness a textbook example of why modern technology and traditional methods couldn't coexist in serious precision shooting. Elena Voss, with her antique rifle and seemingly amateur approach, was about to provide the perfect contrast to demonstrate everything that contemporary marksmanship represented. None of them could have imagined that within the next hour, their understanding of precision shooting would be fundamentally challenged by a 22-year-old woman whose obsolete methods would prove superior to everything their modern technology could achieve. The Ironhawk Precision Training Center represented more than just a shooting facility. It was the undisputed cathedral of American marksmanship excellence, a temple where the world's most elite shooters came to worship at the altar of precision. Carved into the rugged Colorado mountainside at an elevation of 8,400 feet, the facility commanded a view of the entire Rocky Mountain Range, its multiple shooting ranges extending across valleys that provided clear lines of sight up to 2,000 yards. The thin mountain air and challenging environmental conditions made Ironhawk the ultimate proving ground for both equipment and human skill. The facility's reputation had been forged over 2 decades of hosting the most demanding marksmanship challenges on the continent. Military Special Operations units from 17 different countries sent their most promising snipers to train at Ironhawk. The FBI's hostage rescue team conducted annual qualifications there. Olympic shooting teams used the facility to prepare for international competition. Private military contractors worth billions of dollars tested their newest precision weapon systems within Ironhawk's carefully controlled environment. But perhaps most significantly, Ironhawk served as the final arbiter for equipment manufacturers seeking to break into the precision shooting market. A rifle that performed well at Ironhawk could command premium prices from military and law enforcement agencies worldwide. A scope that proved its worth on Ironhawk's extreme range courses would find its way onto sniper teams from the Arctic Circle to the equator. The facility's equipment certification program carried more weight than military testing protocols because Ironhawk's standards went beyond mere technical specifications to encompass real-world performance under the most challenging conditions imaginable. Director Kane Murdoch had deliberately constructed Ironhawk to be intimidating. The main building rose from the mountainside like a fortress, its walls lined with glass cases displaying the evolution of precision shooting technology. Visitors walked past rifles that had shaped military history from the Springfield 1903 that had armed American doughboys in World War I to the cutting-edge systems currently being deployed by Special Operations Forces in classified theaters around the world. Each weapon represented not just technological advancement, but the accumulated knowledge of generations of warriors who had pushed the boundaries of what was possible with a precisely aimed bullet. The facility's crown jewel was the advanced technology range, a marvel of engineering that cost more to construct than most small towns' annual budgets. Computer-controlled target systems could simulate any environmental condition found on Earth. Wind generators could replicate the atmospheric disturbances found in urban canyons, mountain passes, or desert flats. Temperature and humidity controls allowed instructors to train students for deployment anywhere from the frozen tundra of Alaska to the sweltering heat of Middle Eastern deserts. The range's electronic monitoring systems tracked not just bullet impact locations, but flight paths, velocity retention, and environmental factors with scientific precision that exceeded most university research facilities. The instructional staff at Ironhawk read like a who's who of American military excellence. Master Instructor Riley Thornton had earned his reputation as a Marine Scout sniper in Fallujah, where his confirmed kills had helped break the back of insurgent resistance in one of the war's most brutal urban campaigns. Senior Instructor Patricia Walsh had spent 8 years with the Army's elite Delta Force, participating in operations so classified that their existence was known only to a handful of senior Pentagon officials. Chief Range Officer Marcus Davidson had served as the primary sniper instructor for SEAL Team 6, training the men who would later conduct some of the most famous special operations missions in modern history. These weren't just skilled shooters. They were legends whose techniques had been studied, refined, and incorporated into training doctrine used by elite units worldwide. Students traveled from every continent to learn from instructors whose real-world experience included some of the longest confirmed kills in military history. The waiting list for advanced courses stretched 18 months into the future, with slots routinely selling for $15,000 per week to civilian contractors, and foreign military units seeking the ultimate in precision shooting education. The facility's equipment standards reflected its uncompromising approach to excellence. Every rifle in Ironhawk's armory represented the pinnacle of manufacturing precision. Custom-built weapons from legendary gunsmiths commanded prices that exceeded luxury automobiles, their barrels hand-lapped to tolerances measured in 10,000ths of an inch. Scopes that incorporated military-grade optics and ballistic computers provided visual clarity and computational power that bordered on science fiction. Ammunition was manufactured to specifications so precise that each cartridge was individually weighed and measured before being approved for use in competition. The annual Extreme Range Challenge had evolved into the most prestigious marksmanship competition in the world, attracting participants whose credentials read like Special Operations Unit rosters. Corporate sponsors paid seven-figure sums for the privilege of having their equipment used during the competition, knowing that a strong showing at Ironhawk could translate into military contracts worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Television networks bid aggressively for broadcast rights, understanding that audiences worldwide were fascinated by demonstrations of human capability. Pushed to absolute limits. Qualification for the Extreme Range Challenge required documentation of marksmanship achievements that eliminated all but the most exceptional shooters. Participants needed confirmed accuracy statistics, military service records, or competition victories that placed them in the top percentile of marksmen globally. The application process included background investigations more thorough than those required for government security clearances, ensuring that only individuals with unquestioned credentials and character were granted access to Ironhawk's advanced facilities. The economic impact of the challenge extended far beyond the shooting sports community. Local helicopter services earned substantial fees transporting participants to remote shooting positions. Luxury hotels in nearby Aspen and Vail filled with international visitors whose expense accounts seemed unlimited. Equipment manufacturers scheduled product launches around the event, knowing that innovations demonstrated at Ironhawk would influence purchasing decisions for years to come. Media coverage of the challenge reached audiences far beyond traditional shooting sports enthusiasts. Technology journalists covered the latest advances in precision optics and ballistic computation. Military analysts discussed the tactical implications of new equipment capabilities. Even mainstream media outlets sent correspondents to cover what had become known as the Olympics of precision shooting, recognizing that the skills demonstrated at Ironhawk represented the absolute pinnacle of human marksmanship achievement. This was the environment that Elena Voss had chosen to enter with her great-grandfather's World War II rifle, a world where technological superiority was assumed, where equipment worth more than houses was considered basic entry-level gear, and where the margin for error was measured in fractions of inches at distances that stretched human capability to its absolute limits. She had walked into a cathedral of modern precision shooting, carrying what these experts considered a museum piece, challenging not just individual competitors, but the fundamental assumptions upon which the entire industry had been built. Very notion that obsolete equipment could compete in this environment wasn't just unlikely, it was heretical to everything Ironhawk represented. Elena Voss stepped through the main entrance of Ironhawk Precision Training Center, feeling like a time traveler who had accidentally wandered into the wrong century. Around her, the facility hummed with the quiet efficiency of a high-tech laboratory, crossed with a military command center. Digital displays showed real-time weather data from sensors positioned throughout the mountain range. Computerized systems tracked the movement of every person and piece of equipment within the facility's boundaries. The very air seemed to vibrate with technological sophistication that made her canvas rifle case and worn hiking boots feel like artifacts from a forgotten era. The contrast couldn't have been more stark. While other participants arrived in custom-wrapped vehicles advertising major firearms manufacturers, Elena had driven her 15-year-old pickup truck, a vehicle that had seen better decades and bore the scars of countless hunting trips into remote wilderness areas. Her truck's faded paint and rust spots looked distinctly out of place in a parking area dominated by luxury SUVs, tactical vehicles, and motor coaches that served as mobile equipment platforms for major corporations. As Elena approached the registration area, she became acutely aware of the visual assessment being conducted by everyone she passed. The other competitors moved with the confident bearing of individuals accustomed to elite environments. Their clothing bore the subtle logos of premium tactical gear manufacturers. Their equipment cases suggested contents worth more than most people's annual salaries. They spoke in the abbreviated technical language of professionals who assumed everyone around them shared their extensive specialized knowledge. Elena's appearance told a different story entirely. Her jeans showed the honest wear of someone who spent time outdoors working rather than posing. Her boots were functional rather than fashionable, chosen for their ability to provide stability on uneven terrain rather than their adherence to tactical fashion trends. The canvas jacket she wore had belonged to her father, and before him, her grandfather, a garment that had absorbed decades of gun oil, mountain air, and the concentrated focus that came with serious marksmanship training. Most significantly, Elena carried her rifle in a case that looked like it had survived multiple military campaigns, which it had. The canvas was faded and patched in several places where years of use had worn through the original material. The leather straps showed the kind of weathering that came only from decades of regular handling. While other participants transported their weapons in hard cases that resembled small military containers, Elena's rifle case looked like something that might be found in the back of a country gun shop or inherited from a relative who had served in forgotten wars. The registration process itself became an exercise in subtle humiliation. Elena found herself standing in line behind corporate representatives who were discussing equipment specifications in terms of thousands of dollars and technical capabilities that sounded more appropriate for space exploration than terrestrial shooting. The conversations around her referenced custom barrel manufacturers whose waiting lists stretched years into the future. ballistic computers that incorporated artificial intelligence algorithms, and ammunition specifications that required advanced degrees in chemistry to fully understand. When Elena finally reached the registration desk, the young clerk's expression shifted from professional courtesy to barely concealed confusion. The paperwork she submitted listed equipment specifications that the clerk had to look up in reference manuals, not because they were cutting edge, but because they were so outdated that modern databases didn't include them by default. Her rifle's manufacture date predated the clerk's birth by several decades. The ammunition she planned to use was hand-loaded using techniques that hadn't been commercially relevant since before the advent of computer-controlled manufacturing. "Ma'am," the clerk said carefully, "I'm going to need to have one of our senior staff verify that your equipment meets current safety standards. Some of these specifications." He trailed off, clearly uncertain how to diplomatically express his concerns about equipment that appeared to belong in a historical display rather than a competitive shooting environment. The verification process attracted attention Elena would have preferred to avoid. Master Instructor Thornton emerged from his office to personally examine her paperwork, his expression growing more puzzled with each line he read. Other participants began gathering around the registration desk, initially drawn by curiosity, but remaining out of professional interest in what appeared to be an unusual situation developing. "This rifle," Thornton said, studying Elena's documentation, "was manufactured in 1943. That makes it older than most of our instructors." His tone carried the careful neutrality of someone trying to be polite while questioning the sanity of the person standing before him. "Are you certain this is the weapon you intend to use for extreme-range precision shooting?" Elena confirmed her intention, explaining that the rifle had been maintained and modified by 3 generations of her family, each of whom had been accomplished marksmen in their own right. The explanation only deepened the crowd's confusion. Modern precision shooting was understood to be a technical discipline that required the latest advances in metallurgy, optics, and ballistic science. The idea that equipment from an earlier technological era could compete with contemporary systems seemed to violate fundamental principles of engineering progress. That the situation became more uncomfortable as word spread throughout the facility about the unusual participant who had arrived with vintage equipment. Elena found herself the subject of whispered conversations and discreet pointing from groups of competitors who were apparently discussing whether her presence represented some kind of publicity stunt or misguided attempt at historical demonstration. The attention was not malicious, but it was constant, conspicuous in a way that made Elena feel like a specimen being studied rather than a competitor being respected. Her accommodation arrangements reflected her outsider status in ways both subtle and obvious. While corporate-sponsored participants stayed in luxury suites that featured climate-controlled equipment storage and private shooting simulator access, Elena had booked a basic room at a modest motel 30 miles down the mountain. The facilities, VIP areas with their leather furniture and walls lined with trophies from international competitions, were clearly not intended for someone whose most impressive credential was a lifetime of hunting in remote Montana wilderness areas. The social dynamics during the pre-competition gathering reinforced Elena's isolation from the professional shooting community. Conversations naturally formed around shared experiences with specific equipment manufacturers, mutual acquaintances from military service, or common participation in previous high-level competitions. Elena found herself standing at the edges of these discussions, lacking the professional connections and technical vocabulary that served as entry points into the community's social networks. Even the facility's dining arrangements highlighted the disparities between Elena and her fellow competitors. Corporate representatives hosted elaborate dinners for their sponsored shooters, complete with presentations about new product developments and discussions of lucrative endorsement opportunities. Independent competitors gathered in smaller groups to share war stories and technical insights gained through years of professional experience. Elena ate alone, studying weather reports and making final adjustments to her equipment, while surrounded by the animated conversations of individuals who clearly belonged in this elite environment in ways that she did not. The final insult came during the mandatory safety briefing, when the range safety officer specifically addressed Elena's equipment situation in front of the entire group. "We have one participant using vintage equipment that requires special safety protocols," he announced, his tone suggesting that Elena's presence represented a potential hazard to the smooth operation of the competition. Everyone needs to be aware that older firearms may not respond to standard safety procedures. As Elena prepared for sleep the night before competition, she reflected on the day's experiences with a mixture of determination and resignation. She had entered an environment where her background, equipment, and approach marked her as fundamentally different from everyone else. Tomorrow she would either prove that her unconventional methods could compete with the world's best, or she would provide a cautionary tale about the dangers of bringing outdated techniques to modern competitions. Either way, she was committed to representing her family's legacy with the same dignity and precision that had characterized 3 generations of Voss marksmen. The morning of the Extreme Range Challenge dawned with crystalline clarity, the kind of mountain weather that made distant targets appear deceptively close while hiding atmospheric conditions that could destroy even the most carefully calculated shots. Elena arrived at the facility's main demonstration area to find herself facing the largest gathering of elite marksmen she had ever encountered. 200 of the world's finest shooters had assembled in a natural amphitheater carved into the mountainside, their expensive equipment glinting in the early sunlight. Like a military armory on display, Director Murdoch stood at the center of the gathering, commanding the attention of the crowd with the practiced authority of someone accustomed to controlling high-stakes situations. His voice carried clearly across the assembled group as he outlined the day's events, emphasizing the technical challenges that would separate true professionals from amateur enthusiasts. Elena noticed how his gaze lingered on her position at the back of the crowd, a subtle smile playing at the corners of his mouth as if he were anticipating entertainment at her expense. "Today's demonstration will begin with our traditional opening challenge," Murdoch announced, his voice taking on the theatrical quality of someone who enjoyed being the center of attention. "We'll start with targets at 800 yards, progressing to 1,200 yards for those who demonstrate adequate proficiency. As always, Ironhawk maintains the highest standards of safety and professionalism." The emphasis he placed on professionalism was clearly directed toward Elena, and several participants turned to look at her with expressions that ranged from curiosity to outright skepticism. Elena felt the weight of their collective assessment, understanding that she had become the unofficial entertainment for the morning's proceedings. Her canvas rifle case and modest appearance had marked her as someone who didn't belong, and the crowd was clearly anticipating the spectacle of her inevitable failure. "Now," Murdoch continued, his tone shifting to something approaching theatrical announcement, "we have a special situation this morning. It appears we have a participant who believes that vintage equipment can compete with modern precision shooting systems." He gestured toward Elena with the kind of flourish usually reserved for circus ringmasters introducing unusual acts. "Perhaps we should begin with a demonstration of why technological advancement matters in precision marksmanship." The crowd's reaction was immediate and brutal. Laughter erupted from multiple directions, accompanied by comments that were meant to be heard. "Is this some kind of historical reenactment?" called out someone from the corporate sponsorship area. "Did someone forget to tell her this isn't a museum tour?" shouted another voice from the equipment manufacturer section. Elena felt heat rise in her cheeks as the mockery intensified. Professional shooters who had been courteous during individual encounters now felt emboldened by the group dynamic to express their skepticism more openly. She noticed camera phones appearing throughout the crowd, Participants apparently anticipating viral video content from what they expected to be a spectacular failure. "Ma'am," Murdoch addressed Elena directly, his voice carrying across the assembled crowd with amplified clarity. "Would you care to explain to our professional audience why you believe equipment from 1943 can compete with precision systems that incorporate decades of technological advancement?" The question was clearly designed to put Elena on the defensive, forcing her to justify her presence before an audience that had already judged her methods inadequate. Elena understood that any response she gave would likely generate additional mockery, but remaining silent would be interpreted as acknowledgement that her approach was indefensible. "Sir," Elena replied, her voice steady despite the hostile attention focused on her, "I believe that marksmanship fundamentals remain constant regardless of technological assistance. My rifle has proven accurate in capable hands." The response triggered an even stronger wave of laughter from the crowd. "Capable hands," someone shouted mockingly. "I'd like to see those capable hands hit anything beyond 200 yards with that antique." The comment generated appreciative chuckles from equipment manufacturers who clearly viewed Elena's presence as validation of their product's superiority. Master Instructor Thornton stepped forward, his expression suggesting that he felt some obligation to protect Elena from the crowd's increasing hostility. "Perhaps," he said diplomatically, "we could arrange a preliminary demonstration at shorter distances. Something more appropriate for—" He paused, clearly searching for a tactful way to describe equipment he considered inadequate for serious competition. "No," Elena said firmly, surprising both Thornton and the assembled crowd with her directness. "I'd like to attempt the same challenges as everyone else. I didn't drive 6 hours to shoot at reduced distances." The statement generated a moment of stunned silence before the crowd erupted in even louder laughter. Elena's insistence on competing at full distances was apparently viewed as either remarkable arrogance or complete delusion. Corporate representatives began making wagers on how badly she would miss, with odds heavily favoring complete failure to even reach the target. Backing. Dr. Webb, the ballistics expert, stepped forward with the expression of someone about to deliver a physics lecture to an unruly classroom. "Young lady," he said in the patronizing tone usually reserved for children who had asked particularly naive questions, "do you understand the mathematical impossibilities of what you're attempting? Modern precision shooting requires compensation for factors that simply cannot be calculated without electronic assistance. Wind drift, atmospheric pressure, temperature gradients. These variables change constantly and require real-time computation." Elena nodded politely. "I understand the challenges, sir." "Then you must also understand," Webb continued, his voice growing more emphatic, "that attempting precision shooting at extreme distances with obsolete equipment isn't just futile. It's potentially dangerous. Overconfidence with firearms can lead to accidents that endanger everyone present." The suggestion that Elena might pose a safety risk generated nods of agreement from participants who were clearly concerned about sharing range space with someone whose equipment and methods they considered unreliable. Elena noticed several competitors discreetly moving to positions that would keep them well clear of her shooting area. Victor Steele, the former Delta Force operator, approached with the swagger of someone accustomed to being the most dangerous person in any room. "Look, kid," he said, his tone mixing condescension with what he apparently considered kindness, "I've been shooting professionally for 20 years. I've seen what happens when people try to punch above their weight class. You're going to embarrass yourself badly, and it's going to be recorded by every camera here. Save yourself the humiliation and stick to whatever local competitions you're used to." Elena settled behind her rifle, her breathing becoming slow and controlled as she began the process that her great-grandfather had taught her decades earlier. The world around her began to fade as she entered the focused state that separated precision shooting from casual marksmanship. 200 professional observers waited in silence to witness the moment when reality would reassert itself over sentiment and technological progress would be vindicated over nostalgic attachment to obsolete methods. The stage was set for Elena Voss to either make history or become history, and the overwhelming professional consensus strongly favored the latter outcome. Elena's breathing slowed to the rhythmic pattern her great-grandfather had taught her on countless mountain mornings, each exhale releasing tension while drawing her deeper into the focused state that transformed good shooters into exceptional ones. The cacophony of professional skepticism faded into silence as she entered what her family had always called the quiet place, that mental sanctuary where external pressure ceased to exist and only the fundamental relationship between shooter, rifle, and target mattered. Her hands moved across the rifle with the unconscious precision of someone who had performed these same actions thousands of times under every conceivable condition. The worn wooden stock felt like an extension of her own body, its surface polished smooth by 3 generations of Voss hands that had guided this same weapon through conflicts and competitions spanning 7 decades. The iron sights aligned with mechanical precision, their simple geometry offering clarity that no electronic enhancement could improve. The wind patterns across the range told their story to Elena in a language she had learned to read before she could drive a car. While the assembled professionals relied on electronic wind meters and computer calculations, Elena felt the subtle pressure changes against her skin, heard the nearly imperceptible sound signatures that revealed air current variations at different elevations, and observed the natural indicators that had guided marksmen long before technology attempted to replace human intuition. That 200 pairs of eyes focused on her position as Elena made the minute adjustments that would determine success or failure. Her left hand shifted slightly on the rifle's forestock, finding the balance point that would provide maximum stability without introducing muscle tension. Her right hand settled behind the trigger guard with the kind of practiced grip that allowed for consistent trigger control regardless of environmental conditions or time pressure. The target at 1,247 yards was barely visible to the naked eye, appearing as little more than a dark speck against the mountainside backdrop. While other competitors would rely on high-powered scopes that magnified the target 20 or 30 times, Elena's iron sights provided no such artificial assistance. She would have to trust decades of training that had taught her to engage targets based on mathematical relationship rather than visual confirmation. Elena's mental calculations proceeded with the automatic efficiency of someone who had been solving these equations since childhood. Wind speed and direction at multiple elevations, atmospheric density compensation, gravitational drop over extended distance, temperature effects on powder burn rate, dozens of variables that required instantaneous integration into a firing solution that would either vindicate her methods or confirm every skeptical prediction made about her capabilities. The first shot broke with the crisp precision that only a perfectly tuned trigger could provide. The rifle's recoil transferred through Elena's body with the familiar authority of a weapon that had been designed for serious work rather than recreational shooting. The sound echoed across the mountain valley with a sharp crack that seemed to hang in the thin air longer than physics should have allowed. Director Murdoch immediately pressed his eye to his spotting scope, clearly expecting to confirm the spectacular miss that would validate every assumption he had made about technological superiority. His expression shifted from confident anticipation to confusion as he adjusted the scope's focus, searching the target area for the impact crater that should have been visible somewhere in the general vicinity of the steel plate. Impact, called the range officer, his voice carrying a note of surprise that was immediately apparent to everyone present. The electronic target system registered the hit with digital precision, displaying coordinates that placed Elena's bullet dead center on the 12-inch steel plate at a distance that challenged even the most advanced modern equipment. The crowd's reaction was immediate but confused. Scattered applause mixed with expressions of disbelief and demands for verification. Several participants moved to their own spotting scopes, apparently unable to trust the electronic confirmation of what they had just witnessed. The impossible had become reality, but the psychological adjustment required to accept that reality was proving difficult for professionals whose worldview had just been fundamentally challenged. "Check the system," Murdoch ordered, his voice carrying the authority of someone who refused to accept data that contradicted his expectations. "Verify target distance. Confirm wind readings. Something isn't right here." While technicians scrambled to recheck equipment that had been calibrated that morning, Elena chambered her second round with the same methodical precision she had used for the first. The crowd fell silent again, understanding that they might be witnessing something unprecedented in the history of precision shooting. The first shot could be explained as luck or favorable conditions, but a second hit would suggest capabilities that none of them had thought possible with obsolete equipment. Elena's pre-shot routine remained identical to her first attempt. The same breathing pattern, the same grip adjustments, the same mental calculations performed without electronic assistance. Her great-grandfather's voice echoed in her memory, reminding her that consistency was the foundation of accuracy and that external pressure was merely another environmental factor to be acknowledged and dismissed. The second shot followed the first with mechanical precision. Elena's trigger control remained flawless, her follow-through consistent, her recovery immediate. The rifle's performance was matching her expectations rather than exceeding them, confirming what 3 generations of Vos marksmen had known about this weapon's capabilities under proper handling. "Second impact, dead center," the range officer announced, his professional composure beginning to crack under the weight of witnessing something that shouldn't have been possible. The electronic target system confirmed another perfect hit, displaying ballistic data that would have been impressive for any rifle, regardless of vintage or technological sophistication. Master Instructor Thornton lowered his binoculars with the slow movements of someone whose professional assumptions were being systematically demolished. "That's not possible," he said quietly, though his tone carried more wonder than disbelief. The wind conditions alone should have made consistent accuracy impossible at that distance. Dr. Webb emerged from behind his spotting scope with the expression of a scientist whose carefully constructed theories had just been contradicted by experimental evidence. "The ballistic coefficients don't support this level of performance," he muttered, apparently addressing himself rather than anyone in particular. "The mathematical models predict significantly greater dispersion patterns." Elena prepared for her third and final shot, understanding that she now had the opportunity to either cement her vindication or allow doubt to creep into what had been a perfect demonstration. The pressure of 200 professional assessments focused on her every movement was balanced by the knowledge that she was performing exactly as her training had prepared her to perform. The third shot completed Elena's demonstration with the same precision that had characterized the previous 2. The rifle spoke with familiar authority. The bullet followed its calculated trajectory through the complex atmospheric conditions, and the target system registered another perfect impact. 3 shots, 3 hits, all within the center ring of a target that most professionals would consider challenging with the best equipment available. The silence that followed Elena's final shot was profound and uncomfortable. 200 of the world's most accomplished marksmen had just witnessed a performance that challenged everything they understood about the relationship between equipment and capability. The implications extended far beyond individual embarrassment to question fundamental assumptions about technological progress and professional expertise. Elena carefully safed her rifle and stood, brushing dust from her jeans with the casual efficiency of someone who had accomplished exactly what she had expected to accomplish. Her expression showed neither surprise nor satisfaction, only the quiet confidence of someone who had proven what she had always known to be true. The antique rifle that had been dismissed as a museum piece had just delivered a performance that would be remembered in precision shooting circles for decades to come. 18 years earlier, on a frost-covered morning in the remote mountains of northern Montana, a 4-year-old Elena Voss had watched her great-grandfather perform what seemed like magic. Staff Sergeant Jakob Voss, then 83 years old, and moving with the careful deliberation of someone whose body bore the accumulated weight of 3 wars, had taken his granddaughter to a clearing where he could teach her the most important lesson of his long life. "This rifle," he had said, his weathered hands moving across the same weapon that now lay on the Iron Hawk shooting bench, "saved my life 47 times in the Pacific. It fed my family through the Depression. It protected your grandmother during the Korean conflict when I was overseas. It's not just a tool, Elena. It's a responsibility that's been passed down through our family for generations." The old man had spent the next hour explaining concepts that most 4-year-olds couldn't comprehend. But Jakob Voss understood that exceptional education began early and continued without interruption. He taught Elena to read wind patterns by watching grass movements, to judge distances by observing how objects appeared relative to familiar landmarks, to understand that precision shooting was as much about mental discipline as physical technique. By the time Elena turned 8, she could consistently hit targets at 200 yards, using her great-grandfather's guidance and a modified .22 caliber rifle that had been carefully adjusted to match her smaller frame. Jakob's teaching methods combined old-school military discipline with patient explanation of concepts that most shooting instructors never bothered to address. He explained why certain atmospheric conditions affected bullet trajectory, how temperature changes influenced powder burn rates, and why understanding these relationships mathematically was more valuable than relying on electronic compensation. "Computers can fail," Jakob would tell Elena during their weekly training sessions in the Montana wilderness. "Batteries die. Electronic scopes break. But if you understand the fundamentals, really understand them, you can make shots that people with fancy equipment can't even attempt. The rifle is just a tool. The real weapon is your mind." Elena's education accelerated dramatically when she turned 12 and demonstrated that the physical strength necessary to handle her great-grandfather's full-caliber rifle safely. Jakob had spent months preparing her for this transition, building upper body strength through exercises that seemed like games, but were actually designed to develop the muscle memory necessary for consistent rifle handling. The first time Elena fired the 1943 Remington, she was ready for its recoil and capable of maintaining proper sight alignment through the shot sequence. The training regimen that followed would have challenged most adult marksmen. 3 days per week, Elena and her great-grandfather would hike into remote areas of the Montana mountains where they could practice at distances that civilian ranges couldn't accommodate. Jakob had identified shooting positions throughout a 50-mile radius of their family ranch, each one offering different challenges in terms of elevation, wind patterns, and target visibility. Elena learned to shoot from rocky outcroppings where rifle stability required careful body positioning. She practiced from meadows where crosswinds created complex ballistic problems. She engaged targets from forest clearings where temperature variations between sunny and shaded areas affected atmospheric density. Most importantly, she learned to adapt her technique to any environment without relying on external aids or technological assistance. Jakob's teaching methods reflected 7 decades of accumulated knowledge about precision shooting under real-world conditions. He had learned marksmanship during World War II, when electronic aids didn't exist, and a missed shot could mean the difference between survival and death for an entire squad. His techniques had been refined during the Korean conflict and perfected during a civilian career as a professional hunter and guide, who regularly made shots that his clients considered impossible. "The military will teach you to use whatever equipment they issue. Jakob explained during one of their mountain training sessions. But the really important skills, the ones that separate good shooters from great ones, those come from understanding principles that haven't changed since men first started throwing projectiles at distant targets. Wind is wind, gravity is gravity. The relationship between them remains constant regardless of what kind of scope you mount on your rifle. Elena's mathematical education became inseparable from her marksmanship training. Jakob taught her to calculate bullet drop using formulas that most people required computers to solve. She learned to estimate wind velocity by observing natural indicators that electronic sensors often missed. She developed the ability to compensate for atmospheric pressure changes based on weather patterns that she had learned to read like a familiar book. The rifle itself received attention that bordered on reverence. Elena learned to maintain every component to tolerances that exceeded factory specifications. She understood how barrel temperature affected accuracy, why ammunition consistency was crucial for precision shooting, and how tiny variations in cartridge loading could be compensated for through sight adjustments. The weapon became an extension of her will rather than a separate tool that required management. By her 16th birthday, Elena could consistently hit targets at distances that challenged experienced adult marksmen. Local hunting guides began recommending her services to clients who required exceptional marksmanship for difficult shots. Word spread through Montana's hunting community about the teenage girl who could make impossible shots with equipment that most people considered obsolete. Jakob's health began declining when Elena turned 18, but he continued their training sessions with stubborn determination. He understood that his knowledge would die with him unless he successfully transmitted every technique, every principle, every hard-learned lesson to his great-granddaughter. Their final training session, conducted just 6 months before Jakob's death, involved shots at distances exceeding 1,500 yards under conditions that would have challenged military snipers with advanced equipment. Remember, Jakob had told Elena during their last conversation about marksmanship, "People will always underestimate you because you're young, because you're female, and because you use old equipment. Let them. Underestimation is a tactical advantage. When they discover their mistake, it will be too late for them to adjust their assumptions." Elena's college years had provided limited opportunities for serious marksmanship training, but she maintained her skills through weekend trips to remote areas where she could practice the techniques Jakob had taught her. She hand-loaded ammunition using procedures he had perfected over decades of experimentation. She maintained the rifle according to specifications that had been refined through 3 generations of use. Most importantly, she continued developing the mental discipline that separated precision shooting from casual marksmanship. The decision to attend the Iron Hawk competition had been motivated by Elena's desire to test her capabilities against the world's best marksmen. She wanted to honor Jakob's memory by proving that his methods could compete with anything modern technology offered. The mockery and dismissal she had encountered were exactly what Jakob had predicted she would face, and his training had prepared her to use that underestimation as a psychological advantage. Standing now at Iron Hawk with her great-grandfather's rifle, having just demonstrated capabilities that defied every professional assumption, Elena understood that she had fulfilled the promise she had made at Jakob's funeral. The knowledge he had spent a lifetime accumulating would not be lost. The techniques that had made him legendary among those who knew real marksmanship would continue through another generation. The antique rifle that the professionals had dismissed as obsolete had just proven that some knowledge transcends technological advancement, and that exceptional skill can make any tool extraordinary in the right hands. Director King Murdoch stood motionless behind his spotting scope for nearly 30 seconds, his mind struggling to process evidence that contradicted 3 decades of professional experience and fundamental beliefs about precision shooting. The electronic target system continued displaying Elena's perfect impacts. the digital readouts mocking every assumption he had made about the relationship between equipment sophistication and marksmanship capability. His hands, which had remained steady through countless high-pressure demonstrations, trembled slightly as he adjusted the scope's focus for the fourth time, desperately searching for some explanation that would restore his understanding of how precision shooting actually worked. "Sir," Master Instructor Thornton said quietly, approaching Murdoch with the careful steps of someone delivering news that no one wanted to hear. "I've verified the target system calibration, confirmed the distance measurements, and cross-checked the wind readings. Everything is functioning normally. Those impacts are legitimate." The words hung in the mountain air like an indictment of everything Ironhawk represented. Murdoch had built his reputation and his business on the promise that superior technology, combined with professional instruction, could elevate good shooters to exceptional levels. Elena's performance with equipment that predated most of his staff members suggested that either his fundamental understanding of marksmanship was flawed, or that decades of technological advancement had been largely irrelevant to actual shooting capability. Around them, the crowd of elite marksmen was experiencing a collective crisis of professional identity. Corporate representatives who had paid substantial sums to demonstrate their products' superiority found themselves explaining to confused sponsors why a 70-year-old rifle had outperformed equipment that cost more than luxury automobiles. Military contractors whose careers depended on their expertise with cutting-edge systems were questioning whether their technical knowledge had any practical value. Dr. Webb emerged from behind his ballistics computer with the expression of a scientist whose carefully constructed theories had been demolished by experimental evidence. "Director," he said, his voice carrying the hollow tone of someone whose professional worldview had just collapsed, "I've run the mathematical models 3 times. According to every ballistic calculation I can perform, what we just witnessed should have been impossible with iron sights under these atmospheric conditions." Murdoch turned to face Elena, his expression completing its transformation from theatrical condescension to something approaching reverence. The young woman who had been the object of his mockery 90 minutes earlier now represented a challenge to everything he thought he understood about his chosen profession. The implications extended far beyond personal embarrassment to threaten the words hung in the mountain air like an indictment of everything Ironhawk represented. Murdoch had built his reputation and his business on the promise that superior technology, combined with professional instruction, could elevate good shooters to exceptional levels. Elena's performance with equipment that predated most of his staff members suggested that either his fundamental understanding of marksmanship was flawed, or that decades of technological advancement had been largely irrelevant to actual shooting capability. Around them, the crowd of elite marksmen was experiencing a collective crisis of professional identity. Corporate representatives who had paid substantial sums to demonstrate their products' superiority found themselves explaining to confused sponsors why a 70-year-old rifle had outperformed equipment that cost more than luxury automobiles. Military contractors whose careers depended on their expertise with cutting-edge systems were questioning whether their technical knowledge had any practical value. Dr. Webb emerged from behind his ballistics computer with the expression of a scientist whose carefully constructed theories had been demolished by experimental evidence. "Director," he said, his voice carrying the hollow tone of someone whose professional worldview had just collapsed, "I've run the mathematical models 3 times. According to every ballistic calculation I can perform, what we just witnessed should have been impossible with iron sights under these atmospheric conditions." Murdoch turned to face Elena, his expression completing its transformation from theatrical condescension to something approaching reverence. The young woman who had been the object of his mockery 90 minutes earlier now represented a challenge to everything he thought he understood about his chosen profession. The implications extended far beyond personal embarrassment to threaten the foundational assumptions upon which his entire industry operated. "Miss Voss," Murdoch said, his tone carrying the formal respect usually reserved for visiting dignitaries or military officials of superior rank. "I owe you an apology. My behavior this morning was unprofessional and based on assumptions that you have thoroughly proven wrong." Elena nodded politely, her demeanor unchanged by the dramatic shift in how she was being addressed. "Thank you, sir. I understand that. My approach probably seemed unconventional." "Unconventional," Murdoch repeated, a bitter laugh escaping him. "Miss Voss, what you've just demonstrated isn't unconventional, it's revolutionary. You've achieved accuracy standards that our most advanced equipment struggles to match, using methods that most of us considered obsolete." Victor Steele, the former Delta Force operator who had advised Elena to withdraw rather than embarrass herself, approached with the careful steps of someone whose professional pride had been thoroughly humbled. "Man," he said, his earlier swagger replaced by genuine respect, "I've been shooting professionally for 20 years, and I've never seen anything like what you just accomplished. Would you be willing to explain how you compensated for the 10 wind conditions without electronic assistance?" The request represented a complete reversal of the morning's power dynamics. Elena, who had been dismissed as an amateur playing with obsolete equipment, was now being asked to provide instruction to professionals whose credentials included some of the most challenging marksmanship assignments in modern military history. Sarah Chun, the 3-time national champion who had tried to spare Elena from public embarrassment, stood shaking her head in disbelief. "I've spent 15 years perfecting my technique with the best equipment money can buy," she said, gesturing toward her custom rifle system that incorporated every technological advantage available to civilian shooters. "How is it possible that traditional methods can outperform everything we've developed?" Master Instructor Thornton, whose military experience included training some of the most elite snipers in American Special Operations, approached Elena with questions that revealed the depth of his professional confusion. "Miss Voss, I need to understand your ranging methodology. Without laser measurement, how did you calculate the exact distance to target? And your wind compensation. I counted at least 3 different air current patterns between your position and the target. How did you account for those variables simultaneously?" Elena's responses to their technical questions revealed knowledge that most of the assembled professionals had never encountered. She explained techniques for reading atmospheric conditions that predated electronic weather stations, methods for calculating ballistic solutions that required no computational assistance, and approaches to rifle handling that achieved consistency through understanding rather than technological compensation. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes, the Special Operations Command liaison who had been concerned about equipment procurement decisions, found herself taking notes as Elena described marksmanship principles that weren't taught in any military manual she knew. "Miss Voss," she said, "the techniques you're describing could have significant applications for our units, operating in environments where electronic equipment is unreliable or unavailable. Would you be willing to discuss your methods with our training specialists?" The transformation of Elena's status from circus act to honored expert was complete, but the implications extended far beyond individual recognition. Corporate sponsors began questioning whether their massive investments in technological development had been misdirected. Military procurement officials wondered whether their emphasis on equipment sophistication had overlooked fundamental capabilities that could be developed through proper training. Director Murdoch found himself facing the most significant challenge of his professional career. Elena's demonstration had proven that everything Ironhawk taught about the necessity of modern equipment was, at best, incomplete and at worst, fundamentally wrong. He could either acknowledge this revelation and adapt his facility's approach, or he could find ways to dismiss what had happened and maintain his comfortable certainties about technological superiority. "Miss Voss," Murdoch said finally, his voice carrying the weight of someone making a decision that would define his facilities' future direction, "I would like to formally invite you to join our instructional staff." We clearly have much to learn from your methods, and I believe our students would benefit enormously from exposure to techniques that we've apparently overlooked. The offer represented more than just professional recognition. It was an acknowledgement that Elena's approach had revealed gaps in contemporary marksmanship education that needed to be addressed. The facility that had dismissed her methods as obsolete was now seeking to incorporate her knowledge into their training programs. Elena's response was gracious, but non-committal. She explained that she was still completing her education and wasn't ready to make career commitments, but she expressed willingness to share her knowledge with serious students who were interested in learning traditional techniques. As the crowd began to disperse, participants gathered around Elena with requests for private instruction, questions about equipment modification, and invitations to demonstrate her methods at other facilities. The young woman who had arrived as an unwelcome among her students sat some of the same professionals who had mocked her vintage equipment 24 months earlier. Victor Steele, the former Delta Force operator, now advocated for incorporating traditional methods into special operations. Training after Elena's techniques had helped his consulting firm win several major military contracts. Sarah Chun had modified her competitive approach to include Elena's wind reading methods, resulting in her 4th and 5th national championship victories. Dr. Webb had co-authored 3 peer-reviewed papers with Elena, documenting how traditional marksmanship principles could enhance rather than replace modern ballistic science. The transformation of Ironhawk itself reflected the broader changes Elena's demonstration had catalyzed throughout the precision shooting community. Director Murdoch had restructured the facility's entire curriculum around what he now called integrated marksmanship training, programs that combined cutting-edge technology with traditional techniques that had been proven effective across multiple generations. The waiting list for Elena's advanced courses extended 18 months into the future, with participants including Olympic team members, military special operations units, and law enforcement agencies seeking to improve their long-range capabilities. The most important lesson my great-grandfather taught me, Elena continued, gesturing toward a photograph of Staff Sergeant Jakob Voss that now occupied a prominent position in Ironhawk's Hall of Honor, was that equipment should enhance human capability, not replace human understanding. When you truly comprehend the fundamental principles governing precision shooting, any rifle becomes capable of extraordinary performance. The economic impact of Elena's influence extended far beyond the training facility itself. Equipment manufacturers had begun producing Heritage Series rifles that incorporated traditional design elements with modern manufacturing precision. Ammunition companies offered hand-loading workshops that taught techniques Elena had learned from her great-grandfather. Optics manufacturers developed simplified scope designs that provided electronic assistance without eliminating the shooter's need to understand basic ballistic principles. More significantly, Elena's success had attracted attention from educational institutions seeking to understand how traditional knowledge transmission methods could complement contemporary technical training. Universities studying human performance under extreme conditions regularly sent research teams to observe Elena's teaching methods. Military academies incorporated case studies of her Ironhawk demonstration into their curricula as examples of how unconventional approaches could challenge established assumptions and produce breakthrough results. The social implications of Elena's achievement resonated far beyond the shooting sports community. Her story had become a powerful example of how gender, age, and economic background need not determine capability or limit potential achievement. Young women throughout the country had begun participating in precision shooting programs at unprecedented rates, inspired by Elena's demonstration that traditional male-dominated fields were accessible to anyone willing to develop the necessary skills through dedicated practice and proper instruction. Elena's speaking engagements extended into corporate settings where business leaders sought to understand how her approach to mastering traditional techniques could apply to other industries facing technological disruption. Her presentations emphasized the importance of understanding fundamental principles before attempting to enhance them through technological assistance, a message that resonated with organizations struggling to balance innovation with proven methodologies. Rifle range where Elena had first shocked the precision shooting establishment now featured a permanent display documenting her achievement and its aftermath. Visitors could examine the same steel target she had struck at 1,247 yards, read testimonials from professionals whose assumptions she had challenged, and view equipment comparisons that illustrated how traditional methods could achieve results. That expensive technology couldn't guarantee. Director Murdoch approached Elena as she concluded her morning instruction session, his expression carrying the satisfaction of someone whose professional humility had ultimately strengthened rather than diminished his facility's reputation. The applications for next year's Heritage Marksmanship Symposium are already exceeding our capacity, he reported. Military representatives from 17 countries have requested participation, and we're receiving inquiries from civilian organizations we've never worked with before. Elena nodded, understanding that her great-grandfather's techniques were reaching audiences that Jakob could never have imagined. He always said that good knowledge finds a way to survive and spread, she replied. I think he would be pleased to know that his methods are helping people achieve capabilities they didn't know they possessed. The afternoon session brought Elena's favorite part of her teaching schedule, working with young shooters who were learning precision marksmanship for the first time. These students had no preconceived notions about equipment requirements or technological limitations. They approached Elena's traditional methods with the open curiosity that allowed for rapid skill development and genuine understanding of fundamental principles. Remember, Elena told a group of teenage participants as they prepared for their first extreme range attempts, the rifle is just a tool for expressing your knowledge and discipline. The real accuracy comes from your ability to read conditions, calculate solutions, and execute consistently under pressure. Master those skills, and any equipment becomes capable of precision that will surprise people who think technology is more important than technique. As the day's training concluded, Elena walked to the memorial bench that Ironhawk had installed overlooking the range where she had first demonstrated her capabilities. The bench bore a simple plaque honoring Staff Sergeant Jakob Voss and acknowledging his contribution to preserving marksmanship knowledge that might otherwise have been lost to technological advancement. Sitting in the mountain silence, Elena reflected on how completely her life had changed since that morning when she had been dismissed as a naive amateur playing with obsolete equipment. Her great-grandfather's rifle had not only vindicated his teaching methods, but had created opportunities for sharing that knowledge with students who would carry those techniques into the next generation. The antique weapon that had been mocked as a museum piece had become the catalyst for a renaissance in traditional marksmanship training. Elena's demonstration had proven that some knowledge transcends technological progress, and that exceptional human capability could transform any tool into an instrument of extraordinary achievement. As the sun set behind the Colorado peaks, Elena understood that she had fulfilled her promise to preserve and honor her family's legacy while creating new pathways for others to discover capabilities they never knew they possessed. The quiet place her great-grandfather had taught her to find in the chaos of competition had become a foundation for teaching others to achieve their own impossible shots. The story that had begun with mockery and dismissal had evolved into inspiration and transformation, proving that sometimes the most profound changes come from most unexpected sources. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.